Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, 7 Layers of Beauty. My name is Seven, and today we will be discussing how pilots deliberately caused the fatal plane crash of Chapecoense, which is Brazil's celebrated football team. So, without further ado, I would like to go ahead and jump right into my disclaimer that everything that I am discussing in this video is everything I've done my research on, I've gotten off of the internet, and I just compiled it into one video. So, at this point, Chapecoense, they needed to go 1,600 miles to their championship site, which is in Rio Negro. And Rio Negro is just outside of Medellin, Colombia, and they'll be playing as the underdogs. And this will be their first ever final prestigious Copa Sudamericana football game. So they're super excited. So they hire a small Bolivian airline named Lamia, and Lamia assigned them an Avro 146 regional jet. Now, this jet has four engines, which means they have a lot of reliability. It's a sound airframe, and it also has a good design. So on November 28th of 2016, Chapecoense goes on and they board onto their flight, and the flight that they're assigned is 2933. And on board is 77 people. It's 68 passengers and 9 crew members. Now, the pilots in charge of flying today is Captain Miguel Quiroga and First Officer Fernando Boitia. They both have 6,000 flight hours each, and they also have flown this aircraft before. So they're a little familiar with this jet, making them the best crew to get Chapecoense and everyone on board to their destination safely. Now, Flight 2933, they're ready for takeoff, and they begin departing from Santa Cruz, Bolivia, just before sunset with around 6:18 p.m. Now, in the cabin, Chapecoense, they're taking videos, they're sending it to their friends and their family. They're ready to land at this point. So they all decide to just listen to some music and they fall asleep so that they can get there faster. So, 4.5 hours after takeoff, they approach Rio Negro. And First Officer Guatia, he checks in with ATC. And he checks in with ATC to get confirmation that they're in radar contact. ATC lets them know, like, hey, you're in radar contact. All we need you guys to do is to maintain and descend at a certain flight level so that you can join Rio Negro's VOR. And then they would need to go into a holding pattern because other flights are below them and they are trying to land. And if you don't know what a VOR is an instrument used to let the pilots know if they're at a certain altitude or what altitude they are at. Right. So as pilots begin to go in their Gimli pattern, which is the pattern that they chose, it was verified with ATC, and ATC lets them know to just stay there and we'll be right with you. But just 7 seconds later, ATC is taken by surprise when Flight 2933 captain calls in and they request priority. At this point, she's a little confused. She doesn't know what's going on and why they would ask that. But nonetheless, she lets them know that, hey, you're going to have to hold that Gimli pattern because there's a flight below you and he's 1 mile below you. And there's also runway inspections going on. So the at this point, the pilots, they're trying to figure out what they need to do, but they ended up just calling it just 30 seconds later, and they let them know that they need a fuel emergency. So they declare this fuel emergency, and at this point, ATC will have to part the Red Seas for Flight 2933. Like, when you declare a fuel emergency or an emergency at all, the Red Sea just parts for you, okay? So that's what happened. So ATC lets them know that they can go ahead and make a right turn and begin their descent. But in the cabin, the lights completely turned off and all four of the engines turned off as well. Now the passengers at this point, they're panicking. They can feel the plane descending really, really, really fast. And not once did the flight attendant or the pilots let any of them know what was going on. And they didn't know what happened either. So the only thing that they can do at this point was start praying, and they started praying to God and asking God to turn the lights on and the engines on so that they can land safely. Now, in the cockpit, the pilots are letting ATC know that now there's a total electrical failure and they're descending really fast. They're descending so fast that they are now at a 9,000 feet altitude. Now, the plane's master warning eventually goes off, and when it goes off, there's no response from Flight 2933. So Flight 2933 has now gotten a master warning. So at this point, ATC goes ahead and they clear their runway and then they dispatch the firefighters to come in. So Lamia is off of the radar completely. It just completely disappeared off of the radar. So at this point, emergency crews, they've rushed into the scene and they discover that only 7 passengers, including 4 Chapecoense players, survived the crash. But only one of the Chapecoense players was able to call his family members and let him know that their plane crashed. But unfortunately, he passed away a little bit after making that phone call. So now that makes it only 6 survivors. So 71 people are now deceased, and this is making it one of the worst tragedies in sports history. Fans are crying, family and friends are crying, everything. Like there's a lot of mourning going on in Brazil. So as soon as the warning light begins and the air accident traffic control comes, they end up noticing that they ended up noticing that the flight gave them one of their biggest clues when they crashed, and that was not having the presence of the smell of gasoline. So aircraft, their FAA is trying to figure out why don't they have gas? Like we normally would smell this. So what they did is they started investigating that, and they found the fuel indicators, and the fuel indicator noticed that the fuel indicator said that they were at zero. At this point, the investigators, they're confused. Like, why would the indicators be at zero? So they began investigating a little more. So they're like, is this a human error or is this a mechanical error? So while FAA is at the accident, there's fans still grieving, wanting questions. Family and friends want questions. Well, I'm sorry, family and friends want answers. The fans want answers and everything. So, to make the investigation get up to speed, they needed to find the flight's data recorder so that they could be able to give them clues as to why this reliable jet just completely ran out of fuel. So investigators ended up isolating the fuel rate to see if there was a fuel leak, because there's a possibility that if it was a fuel leak and the engine shut off, that the pilots, they wouldn't have known. So they just kept investigating, and then they ended up finding out that the flight kept a steady fuel flow of 1,000 pounds an hour throughout their cruise, and the data recorder was normal for the entire flight. So the entire duration, everything was normal. So investigators at this point, they began to check the warning system, and if the warning system malfunctioned, the pilots wouldn't have known if there was an issue or not. They wouldn't have known that they were in trouble. So the investigators, they are blown. They go back to the drawing board, and they can see where the warning system light went off, and they see that it went off at 9:15, but was confused because the pilots declared a fuel emergency at 9:52. So at this point, investigators can't believe that the pilots knew that they were out of fuel for almost 40 minutes, and then they declared a fuel emergency. Like that doesn't even make sense. Like mm, these were experienced pilots that has flown outside of Medellin before, so they knew that they should have landed in Bogota. And if they didn't have known this, the manufacturer pilot's book that states when the fuel warning lights turn on in that particular aircraft that they have 23 minutes of flight, which means they would have to land somewhere very quickly, and that place that they should have landed to would have been Bogota. But these pilots decided to fly an extra 13 minutes beyond that. Now they should have rerouted that darn plane and went to the Bogota airport, and then they could have eventually got to Medellin once they filled up at Bogota. But they didn't do that. So I'm just kind of confused on why they wanted to violate basic procedures. And I know for a fact FAA teaches everybody and all the pilots in aviation to stay safe and not to run out of fuel in the darn sky. But obviously these pilots wasn't on that. So the Chapecoense fans are still mourning and wanting answers. So the football players these are their heroes. So they want answers. They want answers. So investigators at this point, they began turning to the cockpit's voice recorders for answers, but the voice recorders, they fell off like a mile before everything went out. Like it completely went out an hour and 40 minutes before the plane crashed. So this is a major, major setback for investigators. So the investigators, the only thing that they can do at this point is they can just come up with calculations. So they can try to find out if the pilots accidentally miscalculated before they left Santa Cruz. So this is what they're going to do. So investigators began calculating to see if the miscalculation was done right, but they see that the pilot left Santa Cruz with only 20,000 pounds of fuel at takeoff. And this is including the 441 pounds of fuel that they need for taxiing. And once again, if you don't know what taxiing is once you get on the plane and the plane is still on their wheels and they're on the runway getting ready to take off. That's what taxiing is. All right. So these pilots, they needed enough fuel to take off for their flight destination to land, and they didn't have that. So they find out that 3 times earlier this year, this same exact crew had made the same exact flight, but in the opposite direction. So they're confused. Why is it a mistake now? How did they make these miscalculations? Why did they make this simple mistake of not having any reserve fuel each time? So at this point, what they needed to do was the investigators ended up finding out that they didn't follow protocol. So they take a trip back to Bolivia to find out that Captain Quiroga is not only just a pilot for Lamia, but he is also a co-owner and he has financial stake in the company. So there's already a conflict of interest. Now, because he's flying the plane and responsible for the plane, he knows the finances. So investigators decide to get the company's records and they find out that Lamia wasn't paying their employees. Ain't that some stuff? Then they find out that Captain Kuroga, he skimmed on fuel to save money because he didn't want to mess up his financial stakes in the company. So this entire crew, they knew exactly what they were doing. They knew that before they left Santa Cruz, Bolivia, that they didn't have enough gas. They knew this. All because of that. Now, Jackson Foreman was one of the survivors, and this is one of his statements that he said. He said that although I have started back walking with my prosthetic leg, I still have the pain and memory of the plane crashing. He stated that all he wanted is for everyone to remember the ones that he has lost in their lives on that plane and the fighters who fought until the end. And he wanted everyone to honor those who left this earth. He also said that because the pilot's decisions to press the airplane beyond its limits and the unwillingness to advise ATC of the criticality of the fuel situation sorry, directly resulted in the accident, and it's hard to believe that a professional pilot would do such a thing. So I want to know what you guys think about this story. Comment down below what you think. And this is now my second video. I know it's a little cringe because I was a little cringe while I was recording, but let me know what you think. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.